think it's time for me to start the presentation. So yeah, thank you. Thank you all for showing up this late in the evening. I appreciate it, and I will try to make it worthwhile. So I'm Fredrik, CEO and co-founder of Dune Analytics, and I'm going to show you some metrics about this topic that everybody's excited about and know, which is DeFi. And I'm going to show you some memes as well, because I think it's funny. So yeah, let's just get to it and see what the metric tells us about how popular these things are. So the agenda for today is basically I'm going to show you some data, some statistics, and it's going to be only the tip of the iceberg. So I will give you some ideas for where to go next to find more data. And hopefully you get intrigued and start poking around. So first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about DEXs. What does that actually look like? Is the sound okay, by the way? Yes. Yeah, good. To start like overarching high level, last year DEXs did $2.3 billion in volume. And then you can ask yourself, is that a lot? Is that not a lot? Like, does that matter? So to put it a little bit in perspective, $2.3 billion is half a week of Apple revenue, the guys that sell these things. And obviously, Apple is one of the biggest companies on the planet, so I guess it's a question of is a glass half full or half empty? So half a week of Apple revenue is actually not insignificant. But obviously, it's like not huge either. And if we break this down by the different DEXs, we see that in 2019, IDEX was pretty significantly the biggest DEX with the most volume. So they did almost or over 800 million in volume. Then you have Oasis, the maker product, which seems like it's not marketed that hard in and of itself, but actually doing a lot of volume. And then almost a tie between Kyber and Uniswap. And then on the fifth, you have 0x. However, what's interesting is that this is changing quite a bit. So this is market share of volume over time, the last half year or so. And what we see here, we have IDEX, which is the blue chart. And you see that through the autumn, they've definitely lost a lot of market share. And these days, they're not that significant as they were back in 2019. So Uniswap is definitely getting way stronger. And then you also have Oasis, Kyber, and 0x. So these are all competing for the volume, which is pretty interesting that you see this dynamic where they're pretty even. Like different weeks, different projects are is the top one in terms of market share. So this is still very much like undecided who wins in this space, which is pretty interesting. And if we break it down by month lately, there was actually a new record this February. So $372 million traded in 1 month this February. Just helped over July 2019 by the extra date we got from 29th of February. So we see that it's actually growing, but it's not growing like a hockey stick consistently. It's growing in a little bit of a bumpy fashion. To put this in perspective, so January last year, you had $50 million in volume, which is basically the value of the most expensive car ever sold. So it's a decent amount, but it's still a car. And then last month, you have the value of the third most expensive house ever sold. So it's a decent jump from like a crazy car to a crazy house, but still on the scale of something like some rich people buy for their like private consumption or enjoyment. What is also interesting is that we see it's all extremely correlated with ETH price. So it's pretty clear here that the red line is the ETH price and the blue bars are the trading volume. It's very much correlated. And some people say, oh, it's just like because the ETH price went up, the volumes went up, and haha, that's just like, this thing is just a toy. However, we see that on centralized exchanges, the same thing happens. So when the price goes up, the volume goes up. Like, you can ask whether that's causality or correlation, but it happens together. And actually, for traditional stocks as well, you see the same thing. So this is pretty common. Prices and volumes move together. So now we're going to look into MakerDAO. So metrics for what's happening in that system. No, sorry. There's an error in my slides. We're going to look a little bit more at DEXs. So DEX volume last 7 days. How much do you think the volume was the last 7 days? Can I get a guess? We knew there was 370 million in February, so it shouldn't be that hard to guess. 70 million, yeah, it's a fair bet. So the number was $107 million traded the last 7 days. And what is interesting, what is emerging now are these DEX aggregators. And one that's growing like crazy is Oneinch. They started out at the ETH New York hackathon last May, I think. And of that last 7 days, they did 14 million. So they generated 13% of the total DEX volume. And then obviously they traffic the actual trades and utilize the DEXs. So it's not like directly competing, but it's definitely growing like crazy. So here's their volumes, their monthly volumes. And this is pretty much a playbook hockey stick graph, right? They grew 350% since their December volume, and the volume they did the first half year, they now did last week. So they're definitely growing insanely fast. So this is a pretty interesting development, and I think in general across this space, it's something that people have been looking for, like products that really just seems to go to the moon. You can ask where the ceiling is, and obviously here it's about 300, or it's about 100 million a week. That's the ceiling, but these guys are growing very well. And there are also other DEX aggregators that's gaining traction. So you have Pairswap, they're around here. They had a talk yesterday. It's not on the same scale, but they are also growing pretty nicely. And another interesting development is that new products are these days emerging and actually get real adoption pretty quickly. So here's another example. We have Curve, which is describes itself as a Uniswap for stablecoins trading. So it's like very specifically targeted towards that use case. And you see that they launched this year. This is the liquidity in their pools. And it peaked at like almost 7 million already. They have $7 million in their pools, and even did almost 5 million or around 5 million in trading volume in one day. So I think that's a significant difference from like a few years ago, or like the last year, whatever. You have teams that, or projects that build and they go sort of viral on Twitter for a little bit and people think it's cool and check it out, but there's no actual usage. What we see now is that you have these new projects that emerge and actually create traction and get sort of significant volumes and activity in a very short period of time, which I think is super exciting. So that's what I wanted to say about DEXs. Now I'm going to go over to lending and look a little bit at the lending platforms. So all over, there's about 120 million DAI right now. That's outstanding. What's interesting to see is that initially it was almost all ERC20, which people can send around, since early December, basically all of the growth in DAI supply goes directly into the DSR. So that is actually not an ERC20, that's a technicality, but the interesting thing is that instead of minting it and sending it around or sending it into Compound or something, the users are actually just putting directly in to get the DAI savings rate, which the DSR stands for. So this is backed by almost $500 million in value. So you have about 500% collateral ratio, so the system as a whole is pretty healthy in that sense. What's also interesting is obviously now we have multi-collateral DAI. However, virtually all of the value is, that's backing the system is ETH. So obviously, as you can see from this chart, that the value of BAT backing DAI is virtually nothing. So that's kind of interesting. Obviously, the multi-collateral DAI is a long-term thing, and there might be other assets they want to put in there and so forth. But so far, all of it is essentially ETH. As for creating of vaults, formerly known as CDPs, we see that there's 6,000 vaults and about 3,000 vault creators. So on average, there's 2 vaults per vault creator. And how many people are 3,000? Well, it's half the football stadium of my local football club in the suburbs of Oslo, Norway. So it's not, so it's like this section, the half of their stadium is about 3,000 people. So it's not a lot of people, but might not be a goal in itself to have everybody create their own CDP, I don't know. But so the scale of that side of the system is still like fairly small. Another interesting metric I don't think too many people look at is like the actual transaction volumes of DAI. So this is a monthly transacted volume of DAI in general, like how many transfers, the value of transfers happening. What's interesting to see is that in the 4 months since the migration to multi-collateral DAI, basically it almost have managed to just like take over the SAI system. What's also cool is last month was a new record which was almost double the volume of the previous record in November. So this is potentially like a very good indication that DAI usage is actually growing significantly and people are adopting multi-collateral DAI. Another interesting question is like, is MKR a good investment? And if we take a step back and think about how people value traditional stocks, you would typically go about this, for instance, by looking at a quarterly report, and some analyst will look at the price-earnings ratio of some stock. And like sitting there for hours, whenever this comes in, they create that stat, and people look at it, and then it's another 3 months until the next time you look at it. And of course, we in the crypto space think of things in traditional finance basically like this, like, that's pretty lame, let's see if we can do it in another way, a more interesting way. So one of our users, a guy named Tio from the block, he created a live chart with MKR price-earnings ratio and the price of MKR. So here you can see that even though like this is last 3 months or so, the MKR price is very volatile. The price-earnings ratio is actually fairly stable. And this is all live. You can go and look at it on our website. And this is pretty fascinating when you think about it. When you go from the like quarterly report and then analysts do their estimates and whatnot, you can actually have this running on a live basis all the time. You can see the income to the system and the price of the asset you want to buy. So I think this is a pretty fascinating potential future for financial analysis. And what does like P of 100 or 80 mean for Maker? So again, if we benchmark with the traditional world, Netflix PE is about 100. So actually this what you would expect to be like a insanely high risk, very early, like venture style investment that MKR at the end of the day must be, it's actually not that far off from one of like a big public traded company. Obviously, like Netflix is known for its high PE, but it's interesting to see that MKR PE is actually the same as Netflix PE. I'm gonna wrap up soon, but I'll also show you Compound, another darling. They have this is their weekly borrow volume. So what we can see is that it's very volatile. A couple of weeks ago, they did like 15 million in volume. Just before that, they did like 2.5. And what we also see is that it's mostly DAI that's being borrowed and a little bit of USDC, but it's mostly USD-based assets. So it's also interesting that you see less consistency in these systems than in DEXs, for instance. Another interesting development in lending is that liquidations are getting way more competitive. So this analysis is done by Tom Schmidt, which works at Dragonfly Capital, and he had a great blog post about it. What we see here is just like the number of monthly active liquidators in the different systems. So it started out with Maker, obviously, but what we see in the last few months is that more and more liquidators are trying to profit from closing people's bad loans. So it's cool to see that obviously this is a major part of making these systems work, and there are emerging more and more competition in taking part of that part of the system. So those are some metrics. We have all these metrics on our website. You can check them out. There's thousands of more charts there, even more data that you can work on. All of these are based on SQL queries on human readable data. You can view all the queries, you can fork them, you can make your own queries and dashboards, and you can share them publicly. So if you want to look at these stats over time, it's all real time. You can go into our website and have a look, keep track of these metrics, and there's also tons more. So that's all I had, and thank you for coming out. You want to do questions?
Yeah. No questions? No.
Oh, okay.
No, thank you for
all right. Enjoy your free drinks.
Thank you.